We're broadcasting now successfully. I'm gonna try not to be too jealous of your abode there, Brad. When's the so are you as people filter in here, we can just kind of hang out. So the boating this weekend, is that gonna be fishing, or is it gonna be water skiing?
Neither. Very, very slow trolling in a pontoon, hanging out in water. So
Oh, a party boat. Those are the best ones.
party barge, man. That's the pace that I like to play at around here. So
All right. Looks like we got some folks coming in here. Wonderful. Who do I see? Oh, we got Marissa from Figma. Phenomenal. Who else we got? We got Shannon again. We got Ryan. We got Brees from Senbird. Wonderful. So we'll wait for a couple more folks to trickle in here. And then are the pugs going to join us, or are they asleep?
they're asleep right now. I'm gonna see if I can get one of them to come up here in a little bit. They don't like taking the stairs, man. They're lazy, so they don't want to come all the way up these things. So,
how many pugs are we at now?
we're at 2. So yep, we've always had around 3, but we have to sadly say goodbye to one recently. But yeah, we're at 2.
We gotta re-up a pug.
Yep, we gotta re-up. So don't worry, my wife's already threatened to do that. So
phenomenal.
Yeah, man.
Okay, cool. Well, I think we can get started here. We can let other folks kind of trickle in. So, hey everyone, thanks for joining us for another Sales Strategy Office Hours. I'm Pete Kazanji. A little bit more about me in a second here, but Sales Strategy Office Hours is a modern sales production. I think a lot of folks who are here are members of Modern Sales Pros. If you're not, you can check it out at modernsaleshq.com. It's the nation's largest peer education community of sales operations, sales management, leadership enablement, et cetera. And so what kind of inspired Sales Strategy Office Hours was I do this a lot with folks. When people hit me up via LinkedIn or on Twitter or or via email, they're like, hey, Pete, I got to pick your brain about XYZ, sales strategy, sales operations thing and question. And so we kind of had this thought like, well, why don't we just do it publicly, right? And moreover, I can bring someone who's really great into the fold to answer some of these questions. So that's essentially what we do is, over the course of an hour, try to attack 5 to 8 questions for that are kind of like, in people's day-to-day. We'll promote people from the audience to come. So it's, if people have listened to Car Talk or Love Line, very similar to that. So that's that. The recording will be up on YouTube later. You can kind of check it out there. I'll send that out after the fact. But so before we get into it, Brad, you want to? We're joined by Brad Smith, who's the CEO of Sonar. I'll let him introduce himself. We've known each other for a long time. I'm really stoked to have him here. So Brad, do you want to say hi to everybody?
Absolutely. I had to start thinking about that, Pete, how long we've actually known each other. And
forever.
Forever. I was going to say how many one-off sessions like this we've had. It's going to be pretty easy for us to kick it around. But thanks again for having me. I'm pumped about it. So we, Brad Smith, CEO and co-founder of Sonar, we started Sonar for no reason other than to enable and empower RevOps teams to manage their tech stack in a more meaningful way. So we'll get into a lot of what that means, but like I said, we're excited to be here and kick things around, man. RevOps, all things operations, sales strategy, right up our alley.
Yeah, and I mean, this isn't your first rodeo. It's this isn't your first revenue operations rodeo. Can you tell folks about your time at Terminus, Gather, Cloud Sherpas, et cetera?
Absolutely. So if I had to pin it somewhere where I started my operations career, and this was even before I think RevOps was a hot topic or a hot title, was with Cloud Sherpas. And I think my actual title was Professional Services Operations Manager. So sure you can go all the way around that. Goofball. Yeah, pretty much that. But it was still very RevOps centric, and that was one of the first opportunities I ever had a chance to own a tech stack and own Salesforce for that matter. So I tell people all the time, that's where I started to stub my toe the most and really get the scar tissue that I have now that kind of drove us to building Sonar. But ran operations there. From there, went into Salesforce consulting. So, straight into helping customers adopt and manage and enhance their Salesforce system. Enjoyed that. I enjoyed the operations side way more. So, from going at Coastal Cloud, which is a platinum partner in the Salesforce ecosystem, back into the startup realm with a company called Gather, another local Atlanta venture-backed company, which absolutely loved working there. We were about 50 or so employees when I started, and they just successfully exited actually earlier this year via acquisition to Triple Seat. So we've been able to watch them grow and run operations with it. From there, jumped right into Terminus, which a lot of folks, especially on this call, are probably familiar with in the ABM and B2B marketing space. Was running revenue operations there all the way until starting Sonar. So ops heavy.
Yeah. And also a variety of different sales motions, because like I think Gather was kind of SMB focused, and then obviously Terminus was, Terminus is more, targeting marketers, et cetera. So a variety of experiences there. Delightful. And so, hey everyone, I'm Pete Kazanji. I'm one of the founders of Atrium. We make sales performance analysis software that continuously monitors all sorts of KPIs for SDRs, AEs, AM, CSMs, and essentially statistically flags things that probably need attention. So it's kind of like a robotic sales operations analyst, kind of like babysitting everything for you. Also run modern sales, as discussed previously. I got into sales and sales strategy from my previous experience at TalentBin, my last software company. So TalentBin is a recruiting software company that I started in 2010 or so. Before that, I was a product marketer, product manager, and so at TalentBin, I went from being kind of a business generalist to our first sales rep, our first sales manager, our first sales leader, and that's really how I kind of started getting familiar with sales excellence, process excellence, sales strategy, et cetera. Ended up writing a book on startup sales called Founding Sales after that, which is almost done in physical form. It's been available online at foundingsales.com for a long time, but like now we actually have a physical asset. So that's a little bit of me. So, all right, so let's go ahead and get into this here. I'm going to go ahead and promote folks from the audience based on questions that they've had. I think one of the first, we had some folks who provided questions ahead of time. I want to see if they're in here. Oh, okay, there's Henry. So we'll go ahead and grab Henry here. So Henry from Breather has a question about revenue operations or sales operations teams versus individuals, I think. Let's see if we get him popping up here.
Hey.
Hey, Henry.
Time to speak.
I know. So I was telling Pete earlier, Henry and I caught up yesterday. So this is very much a continuation almost of the conversation we were having organically
He's
about
giving
RevOps.
me immense deja vu right now.
Exactly.
Wonderful. So Henry, why don't you tell everybody who you are, what you guys do, and then what your question is.
Cool. So yeah, I'm Henry. I run sales strategy at Breather, which is a flex workspace provider, anything from kind of a couple of hours to a couple of months a year. Large chunk of my role is kind of RevOps, as well as I wear a lot of hats basically.
Sounds right.
So the question that I kind of had, and this has been a kind of personal theme for a while internally and just generally, is like, I think most of us on the call will be able to answer this and know the answer subconsciously, but I guess how do you quantify in kind of revenue terms a lot of these kind of really sophisticated, really cool like RevOps related platforms that are emerging that maybe don't directly impact revenue in a traditional sense? So like something like Atrium, it's a really clear value prop that you can tie to revenue, but maybe something like Sonar, which I think looks phenomenal, and really looking forward to my demo, Brad, is probably less simplistic from a kind of like, I guess, a CEO perspective. So like, where do you see that kind of argument and that easy way to define that?
Right. So like ROI arguments, both from I think is what's kind of cool about this. There's like the buy side ROI, because sometimes internally you got to turn around and like sell it, right? But then also everybody who's like, you have to think about doing this externally as well, like enabling your buyer. So I think this is a really, really great question. So Brad, you've bought a little technology here or there over your years, and then and now of course are selling Sonar, which is it's like it touches sales operations or revenue operations, but it's not like rep enablement or what have you. This is a great question. How do you think about this?
Yeah, it's interesting because what we're selling, and even just the RevOps space in general, to Henry's point, there's other systems out there that are focused on supporting this operations team. And we'll kind of let the cat out of the bag right now, saying that, operations teams are not revenue generating. I hope I'm not busting anybody's bubbles right now, but they're not holding quota. They're not bringing in, deals to the end of the table, but they are enabling those that are allowed to do that. And so there is that direct correlation that you're not going to be able to truly operationalize your sales motions as you go into scaling your company without having a sophisticated operations team that's going to be there to hold your hand, help reps get quotes out the door, make sure that leads are flowing in between all these disparate systems into your CRM and they're getting routed the right way. So a lot of the sophistication that's getting done in this tech space of corralling all these different systems is being done by the RevOps teams of the world. And I say teams, sometimes it's plural, sometimes it's singular, but Henry and I were talking yesterday too about that. Like, how do we expand these teams now? I think a couple of years ago, they were one person or maybe two people, but now there's a lot more robust teams that are being out there to drive RevOps. But to get to the ROI side of things, I think you have to look at what your overall tech stack looks like to begin with. Companies are spending and leveraging hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions, on go-to-market technology. And we all ask that same question: what's the ROI of what we're getting out of? Well, the way we look at it from a Sonar perspective we actually increase the ROI of all of your other disparate systems by making them work better together. So if you can create an environment where these systems are talking correctly, they're working correctly, you're leveraging them to their max. So therefore you are also leveraging the ROI out of Sonar by getting the ROI from those systems. I will say the other part to that, and this is a little bit, Pete, I know you and I've talked about this before too, is getting that point across to the executive level. One of the things that we challenge a lot when I get on the phone with another executive, I challenge them often and say, look, tell me why you've hired someone like Henry to come in and run RevOps. Just, holistically, what's the high level answer to that? And most of the time you get a response of something like, Henry's a badass. He knows how all these systems work, but more importantly, he gives me this business intelligence that helps me make all these business decisions. He tells me which reps are performing well, which ones aren't, leveraging systems like Atrium to do that. He lets me know where these gaps are in our process, lets me know where these roadblocks are in our funnel process. And so if you boil that all down to just two pieces of a pie chart, hopefully your executive is going to say, Henry brings so much strategic value to our organization, and I'll put like 80% to that. Let's say 80% of his value is strategic. Of course, there's 20% of that an executive is going to look like and say, he also corrals all of our tech stack. He makes sure that our users know how to get quotes out, etc. It's like, cool, 80-20 right there. 80% strategic, 20% tactical. And I always challenge executives after that, like, cool, go ask Henry that same question. Go ask anybody who's running an operation.
What do you spend your time on?
What do you spend your time on? And every answer is typically the inverse. It's like, man, 80% of my time is getting some of these systems to cooperate, making sure that I've got, information going from outreach to SalesLoft correctly, or outreach to Salesforce correctly, and then Salesforce to, Gainsight or any of these other disparate systems with Marketo, and you name it, there's systems out there. And their other part of that question is like, I get about 20% of my time to really dive in, get into some of these big components of strategy, and I get to do my reporting and analytics, and that's the fun stuff. That's what drives the business forward. And so the argument there is give that person or that team the adequate amount of time to do what brings the most value to the company. And that's where your ROI really sits. So,
So I think the question, of course, is I dropped a link to, there's a sub chapter in Founding Sales that's actually on pricing. And it's kind of what we're talking about right now. It's like pricing, right? Like an exchange for a value, of value for money. And what Henry is saying is like, hey man, like I get the traditional way of saying like, look, we're going to make our reps more efficient. We're going to reduce the amount of time that they're not spent selling. That's the traditional one. Do you know how much time your reps don't spend selling? Right. But then now when you do something that is like one layer removed, it ends up kind of being a little bit more challenging. So I think one way to address this is well, ideally your vendor can help you with this. So they should have some ROI arguments in place. Absolutely. Like an example of this would be, so I'm scaling up the number of reps that I have right now. And they're closing lots of deals, which is a good thing. Except when commissions come around, then it's a pain in my ass. And so, so now that's growing over time. So that makes me then say, okay, well, what is the job that needs to be done there, and how much, and how can I automate that away? So like a good example of this, there's a company called Spiff that does compensation automation, right? Essentially like commission, it's like modern commission software. Well, that like the amount of time that is spent doing like manual commissions, it like adds up quite a bit once you get to 10 or 15 or 20 reps.
I'm literally doing that. That's been the last 2 days.
Yeah, I mean, like, by the way, it's kind of important.
If you have a look in the Salesforce channel, like that is taking up the last 48 hours of my time. It's just banging my head against the wall with commissions. So you couldn't be more correct.
Yeah, but like, so it's just like the jobs to be done thing of like, okay, well, what do you want me spending my time on? And so in the case of like something like Sonar, this is especially harder in situations where you have like an emerging category. Like the notion of Sonar was like, which instruments all of your revenue stack, like, your workflow rules and your flows and your connections and all these things. Well, it's hard to quantify, like historically, like, yeah, the way that I would do that is things would break and then I'd have to spend a day like banging my head against the wall. And now that doesn't happen anymore. Well, just like quantifying that, like how frequently do things break, right? How long like if somebody says, hey, Brad, can you ship a new workflow rule, a new flow? How long does it take you to do that? Because if you have to do a bunch of archaeology in order to figure out like, oh, okay, well, I would love to ship a new workflow rule for you. I got to do 4 hours of research in order to make sure that when I do this new thing, it's not going to destroy like a bunch of other stuff. So I would say just like break it down, right? Break it down to the job to be done, the time associated with it. What's the best alternative? And so this it's traditional kind of pricing stuff, which I talk about a little bit there in that chapter. Wonderful.
Absolutely.
Well, Henry, thank you very much. Appreciate it, and we'll move on to our next question here.
Yeah. Thanks, Henry.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, man. While you're looking at that next question, Ryan just kind of jumped in real quick. I mean, what are some of the examples of the platforms that Sonar helps optimize or make an impact on? The biggest thing that we all live in a world that's revolving around our CRM, right? And to Pete's point, when you think about optimizing how that system works, there are so many components and so many what I just call blind spots through there all the time. You don't always get to know what field's being referenced here in all these different places and all these different automations and workflow rules and process builders and flows and Apex. And so you're left with two things. You have two options. You either spend a lot of time researching to make sure that one change that you're going to go make works the right way and peeling back all these onion layers to try to find it, or you put your cowboy hat on and you just go in and make that change and see what happens.
Cross your fingers and your toes.
Yeah, cross your fingers, hold your breath, and just hope that nothing bad happens. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say I've done that plenty of times. The story I've told Pete so many times, it's like, I was rolling out products and price books at Terminus, and this was fun. I hit one wrong button, and I took us from a multi-million-dollar company to a $0 million company because I wiped out all of our revenue, and that was fun. And I did proper testing, but I just had a couple blind spots. And I said, you know what, let's go. We got to go fast. We got to move quick. Let's go make these changes. And it, that 30-minute change that I made took me 2 days to go and fix. And so that's one of those things where you want to be able to navigate this stuff confidently, have a clear view of what you're about to change, and make sure you're not going to screw anything up.
Yeah, like a good example of this would be, so at Atrium, we're scaling up our AEs, and we're like, so AEs are our sales motion has gotten a lot better. We have like really great repeatability. So the AEs are sending out more and more and more quotes. And so we actually introduced a bug in a quote, which got signed.
Good.
Yeah, fun. And so now I had to unwind that the other day. It was a $10,000 mistake, and yeah, it was awesome. So it's kind of one of those things where like, I know we're like moving fast and breaking things, and by the way, it like makes sense. But then so then you go forward and you say, well, how many times, this is like an insurance thing. So how many, like if you're sending however many quotes, like what's your defect rate and what's the magnitude of that potential defect? And so at that point I was like, cool, this isn't happening anymore. I'm gonna so there's a company called RevOps that does modern CPQ software, and so I was just like, I know the founder, Adam Balai, and I was just like, cool. Actually, our head of customer success, Karen Rohr, who also handles all our finance, she's like, Pete, this can't fucking happen anymore. And I was like, you're right. I'm gonna get rid of like our booty CPQ, which is like a Google sheet that like got picked up by like mail merge thing or whatever, but it didn't have any like validation and SKUs and whatever else. I'm like, you're right. I'm now gonna prioritize that. Now, of course, the difference between something like RevOps, which is like takes 30 minutes to set up, versus like SteelBrick that takes like 4 months to set up, was that I was able, this is like one of the nice things about like, the PQL SaaSification of a lot of these like important parts of the revenue stack. Like CPQ, it's important, but because it's such a pain in the ass to implement historically, you wait until you have 20 reps, 30 reps or whatever. Whereas now I have 4 reps and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to prioritize this because I know that the lift is up. But the point being that like, it's like, cool, what's the defect rate? What's the consequence of that error? Like, is it a $10,000 like F up that you then are like, well, cool, let's avoid that going forward. Cool. So I want to go ahead and bring Quinn into the conversation here, because I thought he had a really fantastic question here to bring up. Quinn, I just promoted you up to a panelist. Oh, and then Ryan, the name of the modern CPQ vendor is RevOps. It's phenomenal. It took me like 30 minutes to implement it, and now we get to like push out these like really delightful quotes. Actually, speaking of CPQ, Quinn, my man, hold on a second, you're on mute. Let me see if I can. Can I unmute you?
Can you hear me now?
Hey, there he is.
What's happening?
Sure can. What's up, Quinn?
Hey, hello. Thank you for joining us. Hey, Quinn, can you introduce yourself? What you do, your company, and then we can get into your question.
Yeah, definitely. So I was working at Aptus as director of sales ops, kind of on the sales strategy and operations team. So we cover territory planning, compensation, analytics, reporting, forecasting, and pricing. And we recently merged with Conga. So now we have Aptus plus Conga, which was kind of merging about two 1,000 employee SaaS companies during a global pandemic, which was extremely, not too bad. So we are in the process of getting ready to have our combined company integrated for the start of Q3, which is August 1st, so in a few weeks. And our 2 Salesforce instances won't get integrated for another 6 months. So we are going through the process of how do we integrate these 2 sales operations and manage it out of 2 separate Salesforce instances for the next 6 months. So was curious if anybody has that type of using 2 different CRMs and keeping them in sync and kind of tips along those lines.
Wow.
Yeah.
I wish actually, so Karen Rohrer, who runs customer success at Atrium, she used to run sales operations. She has a sales ops background. All of our customer success people have sales ops backgrounds. So she used to run sales ops at Double Dutch, but then after Double Dutch downsized, she moved to LinkedIn and was essentially the sales ops business partner on Lynda.
Oh yeah,
which
yeah.
is like, yeah, because historically most of LinkedIn's acquisitions have been like not super like scaled, and then Lynda was like very scaled. So I wish she was here to chat about that, because I'm sure she has a lot of commentary on that. Brad, have you ever worked on, I think were you there when Terminus acquired Sixter?
Oh yeah. So
and I guess there was the first acquisition, BrightFunnel. Oh, you worked on that,
dude. So
yeah.
Quinn, you'll love this. So when I started at Terminus, actually before I started, I signed my offer letter with Terminus, and I remember when I was interviewing the whole time, they were like, "Just be ready for rapid growth. We're gonna grow quickly. Wink, wink, hint, hint." And they just, very much nodding to the fact that there was probably gonna be some acquisitions along the way. So I signed my offer letter. I think at the time Terminus was like 115-person company. The very next day after I signed my offer letter, they turned into a 165-person company because of an acquisition with BrightFunnel. So my first year there was essentially trying to get these two companies to act the same. And not only from a mechanics of like our go-to-market strategy and trying to figure out what our messaging was and how do we cross-sell these two platforms, but how the hell do we get these two sales forces that have 7 years worth of data here and 4 years worth of data here? How do you get these things to actually, overlap together? And the first step that we took, and I would strongly suggest this, is even before you try to start getting all of these tactical mechanisms to align to each other, get them both sort of cleaned up on their own. Too often we talk about this, even Dan Grossberg, who's in here, we've talked about this a couple times, and some other folks on the call. Oftentimes you go into a new org and you're just inheriting somebody else's mess, and you're inheriting some tech debt that they have, and there's fields that are floating around everywhere that you don't know what they mean. Do yourself a favor and get all those out of the way first, all the way down to check boxes that you think might be important, but you realize they're not even being used anywhere. So clean all that up. Second to that, find out a way to get essentially some sort of like data dictionary between these two orgs. And it's granular, but it's so important because company A might be calculating TCV totally different than company B. And that's important. And even kind of checking the chat right now, looking at what Chris Feza, what's up, Chris, was saying, like, do Salesforce to Salesforce connections. Absolutely, like spot on. You want to make sure that those fields that you're interpreting those fields that you're about to start connecting between the two orgs the right way. And it sounds silly, but like, we look at all of these fields like MRR and ARR and ASP and TCV. These all have a ton of formulas behind them. And if you don't have those two things aligned the right way, you're going to start crossing hairs. And you're going to say,
how did you do that? Did you just like do it in a Google Sheet where you're just like, here are the things, like here are the ones that are important, here are the ones that are not important, and then like the definitions under them?
Yep, that's exactly it.
That's what we've kind of started doing. We've, are doing our field mappings and like combining things in Snowflake, and we have Power BI sitting on top of that. So we at least have some integrated reporting, but then we have to figure out how are we actually going to manage this stuff? Like, we can do some territory models and stuff, but we actually have to live with these two. Leads come in, what Salesforce do they go to? What field are they going to need? And I've never gone through this before, so I'm like, there's got to be. But I agree with you. Cleaning up, we didn't have to clean up our existing, mess of fields because we had enough band-aids on things that we could operate. But then when you combine those two, all of a sudden everything is a light shined on all of the existing issues. So
yeah, it's I mean, I'd be lying to you if I said it was an easy task. I mean, I think it took me, I did this mostly solo. We had a lot of ownership in different departments, right? You want to identify who the people are that are going to own their stake in the, in the pie. It was a good 6 month, almost like maybe closer to 9 month project before we finally got everybody cooperating into one org and having, look, here's the thing, everybody, both those companies have their own tech stack. And the reality is most of them probably overlap. You're using Salesforce and probably using something like Marketo for both companies, but one could be using SalesLoft, one could be using Outreach. You got to figure out like those mechanisms. Same thing with customer success platforms and e-signature platforms. Like there's overlap that's not going to be fully, these concentric circles that are perfect. Deciding those, but I would say if you're going to be owning it, find out who your champion is as high up the ladder as you can. And if you're buying them coffee, if you're buying them beers, whatever you're getting them, make sure they're your best friend, because you're going to need that executive level from the top down to drive a lot of what you're going to need and have them help remove roadblocks. I know that sounds super subjective and a very objective task that you're about to have of putting these two orgs together, but you got to have that executive buy-in too on it.
Yeah,
cool.
That helps.
Wonderful. Well, Quinn, good luck. Go with God.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody envies you your task.
It'll be interesting.
Yeah, I'll get your mailing address at some point, and I'll send you a care package.
Exactly. Yeah. First things first. Buy Instacart a bunch of beer.
Yeah. That's it. Stay well stocked.
Okay. Bye, Quinn. Thank you.
Thanks.
Quinn.
Cool. So I think there was a cool question here from Dan Gottlieb from Topo. So I'm going to see if I can grab him.
Yeah.
Hopefully I did that right. I'll just mark down that we did Quinn's.
Right.
That was a fun one.
Dan.
Hey.
What's
hi,
up?
Dan.
What's up?
Hello. Dan, can you tell everybody what it is that you do here, and and then we can get into your question?
Yeah, for sure. So it's actually funny because the last time I hung out with with Brad and you was at a Modern Sales Pro event at Dreamforce. Go figure. So fitting. So I am an analyst at Topo, research and advisory firm, and my job is to study, the patterns of fast-growing companies and then write about it. Was a practitioner myself, but I kind of have this, weird job where I got to sit in the cracks and try to figure out what's going on. And obviously RevOps has been a really, really big trend. It's almost an amorphous trend because I think it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Is RevOps an operating model? Is it an organization? What's the difference between those two things? And so, one of the most interesting things for me is been observing how this transition has impacted talent and the way you think about, operations talent and what's required of them, especially when you sort of separate sales, marketing, customer success, operations from their overlords of the sales, marketing, customer success leaders. What are the consequences of that? And so my question to you both is I gotta scroll back to it, is basically as we sort of continue to witness this this transition towards more of the RevOps model, I've got sort of 3 parts to it. Number one, how are you observing evolution in org design in terms of the skills that you need? B, the kinds of skills you need to help these people on these teams have in order to now communicate out to the business. Well, I've kind of led the business there on sort of what I'm seeing. But what are the things that you got to work with them on in a macro level? And then the last one is one I'm particularly interested in. It's not a big, crazy, cool topic, but I think it's a really interesting one. And that are just the team norms. What are some of the ways that leaders of revenue operations teams are forcing their folks to come up with strategic insights they can bring back to the business? What are some of those things? What are the routines, things we got to look at that facilitate that thing? So kind of all over the place, big open-ended question, but would love to hear both of your thoughts on that.
Brad, what do you want to talk about org design and hiring profiles?
Yeah, I was gonna say, great question. I'm gonna go get a beer real quick. Pete, you want to take this? Okay. No, So I'll start on, org design. This is super interesting to me because even in my previous two roles, so when I started at Gather, I came on as sales ops manager. I think it was the title. Reported to the VP of sales for 6 months and quickly transitioned to the CEO, changed my title to RevOps, and I was reporting that way. So org structure shift, 6 months in, real cool, right? Even after that, when I was at Turbinus, started, probably gonna mess up the months, but I think in the first 6 months, I was director of RevOps reporting to our CRO. About that same 6, maybe 9 months in, shifted over to our CFO. And so I think the TLDR of that answer is, I don't think we know yet. Where this role starts to sit within an organization, how we're doing some of the hiring profiles for it, I think we're still very much figuring that out. This is also, funny enough, we are talking about this exact same topic next week on the MSP Summit with a bunch of RevOps folks. So definitely tune into that one too. That'll be a fun one. But the hiring profile, the person itself, I think is starting to shift a lot now. I've come from that operations background as well as jumping into the Salesforce ecosystem and being, a Salesforce consultant for a little while. So naturally, I've got a little bit more of the technical side of things, like how do I operationalize these systems, how to make them all talk to each other the right way. I think one of the biggest skills that somebody needs to have in doing that are two things. The ability to be able to zoom in all the way down to the centimeter level of what's so granular about your company, and really what field drives what, how does this field get used by marketing, and how does it get used by sales and success. That's a big piece. But the ability right after that to zoom out to 10,000 foot and go carry an executive level conversation with a CMO, a CFO, a CRO as to why that data is so important and why it's flowing that way. That is a tough skill to hone in on. And I tell people all the time, if you can get that one right, to zoom in and zoom out, man, you're going to be in great shape to have both of those conversation tracks. But just as important, I think one of the skills I learned, I'm very fortunate from learning this, doing the consulting angle, was requirements gathering. You need to be able to hear from your customers. I'm going to use that word pointedly. Like, your customers are those sales teams, those marketing teams, the success teams, the finance teams. If you can't successfully grab their requirements and go turn them into technology solutions or processes, even for that matter, and you're going to have a really uphill battle. And then I think we want to talk about team norms real quick. This is actually something Henry and I were just talking about yesterday. I think 5 years ago, maybe, you heard the term, RevOps manager, director of RevOps, and it was somewhat of that transition from sales ops to RevOps, but it was also usually one person. I think you're so much more now finding these teams that are doing it. Talking to Andy Moat over at Culture Amp, has a large team of folks that he's just scaling up incredibly. One of our customers, CallRail, Lauren, has just, I think, 6 people on her team, 5 or 6 people on her team. And you're starting to see these now groups of somebody, obviously on the leadership side of things, taking control and taking the reins, but now you have RevOps resources. You have a RevOps manager that's dedicated to the sales team, a RevOps manager that's dedicated to the marketing team or to the success team, but you also have, a RevOps resource that's strictly in charge of data. Someone like Greg Meyer, love Greg. I was catching up with him this week too, over at Redis Labs, and his team's that same way. Like, Greg's in charge of all the data and data consistency, data integrity. You also have folks that are in charge of just process. And that sounds silly, but you see your processes enablement. So you see sales enablement jumping into this world. So these teams are just getting larger and larger. I don't think it's a one-person shop anymore.
So I'm gonna say something controversial, which is that revenue operations is just a fancy word, a fancy name for sales operations. Now, specifically, what's happened though, because the jobs to be done are the same jobs, but I think the critical thing is two things. One, the untethering. I know Dan Grossberg's pissed. The untethering of that role being kind of subjugated to the sales function. And that's actually important for 2 things. One, because the operational mindset of we're continuously improving. We're in like, so Brad knows this, like one of my favorite books is The Goal. We talk about it like nonstop, right? So like the notion of continuous improvement, identifying a new constraint, removing that constraint, cool, we're not done. There's a new constraint, right? Like that just mindset of continuous improvement is an operations mindset. So why should that live in sales? That should live in SDR land. Oh, well, what if SDR land lives over in marketing land? Oh, well, like that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be involved in it. You should totally be involved in it. Similarly, post-sale. Okay, cool, deal signed. Hey, like over to this customer success. Oh yeah, like you know what? That should totally not be operationally efficient over there. No, nonsense, right? And I think that like folks talk, like Jocko van der Kooi from Winning by Design talks about this. Like it should just like flow all the way through, and that helps like with the SaaS model of like prove utility and then expand and proliferate. Well, like our internal organizations have to reflect that as well. So the first thing is essentially it's the uncoupling of an operational mindset from just like sales and saying like, no, everybody gets some of this love. That's the one thing. I think the second thing though is that actually untethering it from like this is something that I ran into at Monster. So my last company, TalentBin, was acquired by Monster back in 2014, and so one of the things you have to worry about is like so revenue operations. Sales operations is
jab.
like part referee.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's important to be able to be like, yeah, so that's bullshit. Right? Like that lead source. I was on a call with somebody the other day and they're like, dude, from what I see here, we were like looking at his data, it's like these 4 lead sources are like bullshit. Right? Like we've taken like 40 at bats on each of them and look at the conversion rates. Like marketing is sitting here being like, no, you guys aren't working the leads enough. And we're like, no, look, we're like the SDRs aren't working the leads because when they turn into ops, they don't convert. So like that information has gone back upstream and people now know like, yeah, those are the crappy leads, right? And so that sales ops person needed to be able to be like, no, this is me, the referee. So if your paycheck is signed by, or your bonus is determined by, or your performance review is determined by the sales leader, or the marketing leader or whatever, well, are you gonna be like, yeah, so it turns out that like our reps are poorly managed, even though like maybe the data is telling you like, hey, actually this is, if like you report to the VP of sales, are you gonna be like, hi, I'm a narc, right? So I think in order to be able to like to do that, and we had this at Monster where sales operations was like going into sales leadership, and like I was just enfant terrible, at being like, look, like we have these major issues in the sales organization. Of course, sales operations isn't enabled to be like, yeah, here it is. So I think that's the other thing that's happening with revenue operations is like and that's why the rebranding is happening. That's my view on it. Like not only does it sound cooler and has more syllables, but it's also like, in separation from the previous thing of like, yeah, this is not this is not related necessarily just to sales. So I think those are like the big things that I see. Otherwise, like the jobs to be done are the same thing. Like got to do analytics, got to do strategy and consulting, got to do systems administration, got to do comp, got to do territories, got to do load balancing of humans. All that stuff is largely the same. It's just like, who are you delivering that service to? And then like, who are you beholden to? So that's kind of like my diatribe on that. Yeah.
I think the one thing I'll add on is just because we had this conversation 2 days ago, prepping for the MSP Summit, was
nice.
I believe it was Stephanie Slack. She was saying, I love that she runs sales ops at Qualys. She was like, one of the best parts of why RevOps is, and again, this is still coming from somebody with a sales ops title, but still trying to embrace the RevOps framework and mindset, was when you nail this the right way and you get this structure in place, the best benefit to the entire company is that you're removing bias from the data. And I think it was so cool. I don't want to totally steal our thunder from next week, but it was, you start to have these operations groups and these silos, and inevitably or inherently, you're going to have a marketing ops person have bias towards marketing metrics.
Exactly.
Let's pump that lead source in. That's coming inbound, right? That was website chat. Like I want all these things. Sales, of course, sales is probably going to be very biased towards either outbound or some sort of other like mechanism that's showing that, hey, this was sales generated. Same thing for success. And so she was saying, like, when you capitalize correctly on this framework, that data consistency across all groups. There's no bias there because you are your kind of standalone island, and actually you're responsible for all three of these groups. So you want that data to be right, not biased towards like one mechanism or the other.
It's the same premise behind a CRO, right? Like, by the way, a CRO is not just like a fancy ass title. A lot of people like try to treat it that way. What it means is that you like marketing, sales, and customer success all like you are the throat to choke for all those. So you're responsible. Oh, you know, that's CS's fault. No, that's your fault. That goes into you. And so I think in this case, it's like the operational instantiation thereof, which is like, it's a good approach. But I think like it's important not to lose sight of the fact that like, no, like the jobs are largely still the same. So like, don't get it twisted. You still have to do comp. Don't get it twisted. You still have to do analytics. Dan, was that helpful?
So it was fun. Like it was, for both of you, just like came alive for a sec. It was amazing. Yeah, definitely. You know, I want to acknowledge, Pete, your comment at the beginning. It's really important. I share your position. The biggest mistake that RevOps has made as a movement is by starting by assuming it as an organization. Because to what Brad is mentioning, what you're doing, even though like eventually it manifests at that, but really the point of it is to create objective ownership over how you operationalize key handoffs. And then there's this, it creates a lot more opportunity for the operations team to change the business. But don't get me wrong, you're still going to have to do all that crap you got to do to run the business. But now you've separated the fiefdoms, and we all know the sales to marketing fiefdom, the sales to CS fiefdom, in order to create a much more, you know, strategic insight center. Which is why I asked sort of that norms question about, well, okay, once we can move to the Holy Grail, you know, how do we facilitate surfacing ideas on Brad's sort of zoom out back to the exec team. So it was cool to listen to you both say it. And that was my sort of regurgitation of what I just learned from you. So thanks.
Wonderful. Well, great to see you, man. And we'll have a great weekend. Okay.
Like,
yeah.
All right. Let me find, where did Elisa go? Elisa, let me go ahead and promote Elisa panelist. She had a really great question here.
Yeah.
Around, yes. Yeah. Actually, it's related to this. So if I want to move in, hey, Elisa.
Hi.
Hey, Alyssa.
I almost forgot what I asked.
I'm jumping back in there. I found it.
Yeah.
So can you just introduce yourself really quickly and get into your question?
Hi, I'm Elisa. I am a sales and marketing ops person. I
Wonderful.
was recently laid off from a startup, so looking at new opportunities and
sorry.
Yeah, everything I've been reading about RevOps and sort of the positioning I really like, because I do think the whole alignment and everything is important, and it would be nice not to have the silos if it's possible. But my question is I have a sales ops background as well as regular marketing background, and how do you sort of translate that to people that are trying to create a RevOps organization? Or not an organization, but as a function, or to say, hire me and I will create the revenue ops function.
Well, if you said that you have expertise in marketing operations and sales operations, like, congratulations, you're already a revenue operations person.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right.
I think some of it is, I think of it more because my marketing ops is a little further back in my experience than sales ops, but I have done both, and I've done both all my career. So it's just sort of which was prioritized, which silo I was stuck in.
Yeah, but I think going back to what we were just talking about with Dan, right? It's like, what are the jobs to be? And this is one of the challenges that folks have, is that there isn't like a sales ops, or I'll say RevOps, a RevOps curriculum.
Which, yeah.
Like Jeremy, or there is, it's just like not explicitly stated.
No, which is okay because it's evolving.
Right, but I think there is one in the world, right? Like systems management, comp, like territories, analytics, strategy, which essentially is just like analytics plus business judgment. So that
Right.
this is like this is where you see like the former Bain people and the former McKinsey people and whatever who end up in sales ops, but like they don't know, they couldn't write a workflow rule to save their life or whatever.
They're not tactical. Yeah.
Yeah. And so what I would do is I would just like look at like, cool, here's me, right? Here's Elisa. And like, what do I have and what do I don't have? And if you don't have, and like, like, let's say, for instance, you maybe come from a more tactical background where like, yeah, I can administer the hell out of some Marketo and like the hell out of some HubSpot. I can, administer the hell out. Yeah, I can administer the hell out of some Salesforce, but, maybe my sales strategy is like weaker. Okay, well, that's
Or like,
fine.
I have never actually done anything specific to compensation, for instance.
Wonderful. Well, like, let's read about it.
Yeah.
Right? Like we want to learn about like, and this is where things like modern sales
Yep.
are super helpful, and more tactically like WizOps
Doing
is
all
very
the
helpful.
virtual summits. So yes.
Yeah, but also just like Q&A. Like this is one of the reasons why like online communities are so helpful, is because like you're a fly on the wall and you're starting to learn via you're like learning via osmosis. But there's also like explicit reading that can be done as well. So for instance, like Jeremy Donovan was on Sales Strategy Office Hours recently. He and Aaliyah Homison wrote a book called Leading Sales Development. Well, you want to get great at like being an operations person that supports sales development functions, which might live in marketing or might live in sales.
Right.
It's like a 200-page book that just like, it's like, it's like traditional business books. So like the words are really big.
Okay.
So it's like, so that would be a great example. Or, like Cracking the Sales Management Code by Jason Jordan is another really fantastic one.
Mm-hmm.
So what I would say there is like, so there's like the stack of like jobs to be done to make sure that you actually understand what those, like what
responsibilities.
what your scorecard is, and like, are you like a C or a B or an A in there? And then I think that there's the different verticals as well. So like marketing, sales, and then customer success. Well, maybe you don't have a lot of experience with the customer success side of things. Okay, well, like we can do readings there as well, and just essentially just build out like more of those muscles, and like congratulations, now you are, I mean, already I would just say like just call yourselves a revenue operations professional, because
Thank you.
but then you
Hi,
would
my name
more
is Elisa,
evolve
and
yourself.
I'm a revenue operations professional.
Hey, what's
There you
up?
go.
It's like sales
There you go.
operations, more syllables. Wonderful.
Yeah, and I think that's really the most important part of it.
Yeah.
Brad, did you have something you want to add to that?
Yeah, I don't know. I think a lot of it can boil down to the story you get to tell as well. Because I think there's now this understanding for anybody that's in sales ops or marketing ops, but let's focus on sales ops for now. Everyone in sales ops is communicating and working very closely with marketing.
Right.
Everyone in sales ops is also communicating and working very closely with customer success and with finance. And so I think if you're able to piece together the story the right way to say, here, if I'm applying for this job, here's why I can tell you confidently that I am the right fit for RevOps. While my title has said sales ops, here's the exposure that I've had to this other group. Here's the exposure I've had to this other group. And I think we all know, I don't think anybody would say like, well, your title's only said this one thing, so like, I can't really take your word for it. Like,
yeah, you just want to kind of rise to the top, since there's so many out there, and so I'm just trying to find ways to distinguish myself. So yeah, one
very tactical thing there. I dropped into the chat room the modern sales recruiting roundup, so
I'm on there.
You could. Oh, okay, delightful. Yeah, so like obviously roles show up on there, and then people can put their put their profiles on there as well. Okay, wonderful. Well, thanks, Elisa. Yeah.
Thanks, Elisa. Good
seeing you
again.
Good seeing you.
Yep.
Okay, cool. So last question here. So I think we have a few more minutes here, and I'm gonna go ahead and I think Ryan has a great question here on feedback loop. So let me go ahead and bubble him up here.
Yeah.
We'll see what virtual background he has this week. Oh, same one.
You know what's funny, Pete? I was hunting down a new one based on that guy. I was impressed with his background. It looks way better than the one I'm using.
Yeah, shame about the spelling of the company that people will never be able to like Google. So Ryan, can you go ahead and can you introduce yourself to folks and then and pop this question?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Pete. Ryan Chisholm, Director of Sales, Sensor Up IoT, based out of Vancouver, and MSP member, I think, for 5 years. So love Fridays. So my question is around feedback loops. And often, so I usually work at early stage startups, and I find them in a position where executives in management, especially marketing, engineering, and product, want the customer feedback, but they don't want to dig through the recordings to get it. So I'm always asked, what's your plan to deliver the feedback? And it's like, well, I'm not sitting on all the calls. So and I know there's ways of instrumenting it, and there's the superhuman method, and et cetera, but I'm curious what the best practices you've seen are to gather that aggregate sort of, here's the top 5 things our customers are asking for, and give that back. And how do you give that to them so that they're not like, oh, you're causing me a whole bunch more work, right? Instead of just, here's 1,000 chorus recordings, like, here's the feedback.
Yeah. I don't think anybody wants the hey, here's your 1,000 chorus or gong or Voma recordings. Like, have fun, bye.
Did you have a comment on that, Brad?
Yeah. So what I was thinking more so was I kind of wish Jack, my co-founder, was on, because he's all of product engineering. That's his entire background. But I'll tell you the way that him and I surface a lot of these conversations. And we've done this now for 3 different companies. And we do it a very tactical data layer. As we're moving things through the process of our funnel, we're putting in different data points, how we got to this step, how we got to this step, how we got to this step. Especially on closed lost or closed won opportunities, there's always a big product feedback section of that. Was there a specific feature that really made that scratched their itch, or that made them get across the finish line? Or more importantly, was there a product feature gap that we didn't have, that we didn't get to the finish line on? And so we just bake it into our process way more than trying to do a once a month or once a quarter round table of like, all right, here was the 100 conversations we had, what we take from all of them. Grab that data early, and along the process, don't make it cumbersome for a rep on, at the very end of their closing cycle, or they got to go surface 3 months worth of conversations to figure out why they got that there. We just validation rule the hell out of it a lot of the times to say, like, you have to capture these 4 data points at stage 2. At stage 3, you have to get these 6. And those data points start to tell you a story behind product feedback and really how you're supposed to optimize your product for your customers. So it's worked pretty well for us now for 3 companies. So knock on wood.
So I would agree that, like, making it such that it's just the feedback is kind of in the air, like kind of in the water. So rather than being like, now is the time when we do feedback, but instead there's continuous feedback happening. A couple of different ways that we do that at Atrium. So one thing is that we NPS, we use Ask Nicely to recurringly NPS existing customers. So it reads off of Salesforce. Our contact objects in Salesforce are pretty clean, shocking. And so we have different cadences for the different categories of user. They get pinged via NPS, the NPS bot via email. They respond to it. They can I think they have to click through. We also do NPS in product as well. We use app queues for that as well. And then what's great about this is, like, you get numeric feedback, and then you get unstructured feedback with people just typing it in there. And then of course you can dig in there. If someone's like, oh, it's a 2, bleh, right? You can be like, whoa, okay, we got to jump on this. Like, what persona is this? That obviously never happens with Atrium. It's always 10s.
Of course.
But of course. But so I think that's one thing you can do. The other thing, to Brad's point about like closed won notes, closed lost notes. Yes, capturing the data is important. You can validation rule it. But I think the other important thing is, like, distributing it well is really important. So for instance, with our closed lost, when something goes closed lost, we have closed lost reasons that are pretty crisp. We have closed lost notes where account executives are encouraged to, like, put really, like, meaty notes in there. And the reason why, like, you're able to inspect that is because it broadcasts. So the closed losts go to the sales team email list. There's an email like I have a workflow rule with an email trigger or an email action. It broadcasts it out. Everyone kind of sees what's going on. But also there's a, like, not only is it normed, there's a what's in it for me thing too, because with the account executive, they know that they're going to get the op, like when it comes back around again in 90 days or 120 days or whatever, they're going to get that op again, right? The new at bat. And so having really thoughtful closed loss notes, essentially what I tell these folks is that it's like a message in the bottle to yourself. So as a result, what they have an incentive to capture really good information there for their future self. But then, of course, that then broadcasts by email to the organization. It also goes via troops into Slack, into a specific key sales alerts. And then we do the same thing on close one as well, right? So I think that like that's a good mechanism. And then I think the other thing with respect to like chorus recordings or whatever, to just kind of, I mean, part of this is like, I would push back on your product team and say like, hey, look guys, like this is kind of your job, like as a product manager and like as the founder of a company, like that is your job. You are like the king or queen product manager. So you can't just be like, give me feedback. It's like, cool, what is the specific feedback we're looking for? We shipped a new product. It's like, we shipped a new feature. Hey, everybody, when you demo this, because obviously we created a new talk track around it, we created a new slide around it, right? When you shipped the new features, you collateralized everything and did all that, right? Well, now when we're presenting that to people, what's the feedback that comes back? And clip those in chorus, right? If there's specific feedback, and ping those to me. Don't send me all the recordings. I'm going to ask you very nicely. Like I've done the same thing with competitors. I've done Uber Eats gift card bounties for like essentially shit talk. Oh, cool. You use that solution? What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, tell me more.
And then they just go. And the AE's like, dinner, right? So you can imagine doing the same. You can imagine doing something similar. It's like, look, like we're looking for, and potentially doing it proactively. Like, let's not be just reactive in terms of feedback. When we're looking to ship a new feature, if we have our contact objects well structured, such that we know who our users are, we can potentially go to them and be like, hi, we'd like proactive feedback on this. Would you like to spend 30 minutes or 45 minutes? We'll give there will be an Uber Eats gift card in it for you, rather than just kind of being like catch as catch can, like, oh, well, if there's feedback, then like, that's great. Maybe let us know. Right. So I think like probably the key to all this, usually the answer to a lot of questions that I have is like be intentional and thoughtful, which I think is not necessarily helpful, but be intentional and thoughtful about the specific tactics, and you'll have good outcomes.
Really great advice. Lots of strategies there. Love it.
Yeah.
Wonderful. All right, Ryan.
Love it.
Well, you have a good weekend, and we'll see you soon. Okay. So I think we're done.
Yeah, I was about to say it. Look at the time. I was like, man, we're already up at the top of the hour.
I know. Well, Jeremy Donovan said the same thing. He was like, that flew by and like was super awesome. So, Brad, great job. Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks for coming. We're going to go ahead and take this recording and send it out to everybody after the fact. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can just go ahead and subscribe at the bottom. And if you're not a member of Modern Sales, go ahead and check that out at modernsaleshq.com. Brad, wonderful to see you. You have a good weekend on your party barge, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Make sure to lather up on your on your sunscreen there, and I'll see you online. Okay.
You got it. Sounds good, Pete. Thanks for everything, man. Talk to you guys soon.
Brad.